myself the lead agitator for lips and similar movements. But that's all I'm going to say right now, because I want to kick it over to our first session presenter, Jon Bell from the Hallstrom Planetarium in Florida, to talk to us about Hercules. So over to you,
Yes.
Jon.
Okay, thanks a lot. I love constellations. I love talking about them. I love the stories about them. And as I was doing my research, I picked up on it on Alan Starr names, and a couple of other folks have written on this topic about how constellations are sometimes interconnected. And we know, for example, there are certain families like the Hercules. Well, I'll talk about the Hercules family in the end, but there is the Orion family, which comprises Orion and the big and little dogs and Taurus, and you can work some other things in there like Lepus the rabbit and so on. Then there's the Andromeda family, which is of course Andromeda, Perseus, Cassiopeia, Cepheus, Pegasus, Pisces, and Cetus. I think I got the list there. And then there's a whole section of the sky called the sea, the celestial sea. And that also overlaps with the Andromeda state, because if you look at that part of the sky, typically the autumn evening sky, you find there's a lot of constellations connected to the water. Cetus, the sea monster, Pisces, the fish, Pisces, Astrinus, the southern fish. Pegasus, which you would think, well, that's a flying horse. What's it got to do with the ocean? If you remember the myth, Pegasus was born out of the ocean, which is why when we put his picture up in the dome, he's just a half a horse. And according to tradition, the lower half is still below the ocean waves, formed from a mixture of, if I remember this right, the blood of Medusa's head with the salt water of Poseidon that gave rise to Pegasus. So, and then of course you've got Delphinus the dolphin, you've got Capricornus the sea goat, you've got a couple of soggy wet things. You've got Aquarius pouring water into that part of the sky, and you've got Readiness, the river, on the other side of the ocean. So you've got this huge section there called the Celestial Sea. And then there's a smaller sea over by Orion where you find Argonavis, Dorado, and Bullens, the flying fish, and things like that. And then there is the Hercules story, which I thought, well, you know, Hercules is connected to a couple of other things. If you think about the summer triangle, and you've got Cygnus and Lyra, that's the slide I forgot to look for. Okay, Cygnus and Lyra and Aquila, the eagle. And then in the middle of them all, there's this arrow, Sagitta or Sagitta. And you say, well, what's the arrow doing? You think, well, it came from Sagittarius, but no, it came from Hercules. So that's an arrow that Hercules fired into the middle of the summer triangle, but why? So then I started to do some more research and some really good authors on this subject, and some disagreement, which is the fun thing about science. So having said all that, let me just go ahead and begin my lovely 45-minute PowerPoint presentation. Oh, sure, why not? So this is going to be the Hercules Connection. Dun, dun, dun. And I just want to say right off the bat, I don't have a degree in history. I don't have a degree in mythology. I don't have a degree in anthropology or archaeology. I got a degree in geology and bachelor's, and I got a master's in science ed. So where do I get off doing this? Well, it's because, you know, I have this planetarium and I like to show things off. So I like to let people know that this is the best research I've been able to find, but I'm not the final word on the matter. So having said that, let's move on. All right, the constellation of Hercules is actually fairly obscure. Every time I look for it, I still use the trick of, you know, arcing to Arcturus and moving up to Boötes, the shepherd. And from Boötes, I work my way to the east and get to Corona Borealis. I say, well, it's just to the east and higher up in the sky than Corona Borealis, and boom, there it is, that letter H in the sky, H for Hercules. But of course, this part is an asterism known as the keystone. So this is Hercules, the kneeler, and my internet connection is unstable. Isn't that nice to know? Okay, you see this chart? Okay, I think so. All right. So what I do with my lab students and activities, I will give them a map like this, an equatorial map with all the constellations laid out in their state-like borders. And we talk about how many of those constellations are there that pertain to Hercules. And this chart has the zodiacal constellations in there. You can see them in bold. It has the constellations known to Ptolemy and those in the ancient world. And then down near the bottom and a little bit up toward the top, you'll see a couple of grayed out constellations. Those are ones that were added since the ancient days. So these are more historic in nature. And so I'm going to discount them. We're not going to deal with that at all. And we'll talk just about the constellations, several dozen known as reported by Aratus and all the rest. Okay. Here is what I found out. I've put labels on every constellation that has some tie-in to the Hercules story, not just the labors, but also his adventures. And you can see it really pretty much everything. You can say what constellations were not involved. Well, there's Ophiuchus. You've got Hercules up here, who's the hero, and he's like head to head with Ophiuchus. In fact, the constellation is depicted upside down. They say that when these constellations were first devised, that Hercules used to stand upright in the northern sky, and Ophiuchus stood upright in the southern sky, and their two heads met at the zenith. But owing to Earth's precession, Hercules has kind of drifted toward the south a little bit, so now he's doing a headstand up from the zenith, working his way down to Ophiuchus. So that's something to keep in mind. But look at all those different characters we'll talk about. They all can be tied in with the Hercules mythos. I mean, Lupus the wolf, I couldn't find anything for that, nor Crater, nor Corvus, nor Ophiuchus for that matter, or Serpens, but pretty much everything else is in there. Okay, so I want to talk to you as a storyteller and ask you to put yourselves in the frame of having to tell a story. And what if you were telling that story to little kids and they wanted to see pictures, and you wanted to tell them all these different fairy tales? So you start off with Hansel and Gretel, and you happen to have a picture of a witch. And there she's feeling to see if Hansel is plump enough, and he's putting out a stick so that she can feel and think that he's still thin, that's his finger, and he's still, so that's it. But that's the only picture you got of a witch. And the next time the kids want to hear about Rapunzel and the wicked witch that locked her up in the tower, and then they want to hear about Snow White and the evil queen who was a witch, and on and on. And so if you look at a lot of fairy tales, the witch keeps coming back in as the antagonist for a lot of these stories. But what if you just had that one picture? Well, then the next day you say, remember how this was the witch in Hansel and Gretel? Well, this is Rapunzel's witch now. So the constellations are a bit like that too. As you know from your own research, any constellation has got this really rich, well, the word is palimpsest. It's just a layering over of different stories from different cultures and different times over time. So the Big Dipper, as you know, is not the Big Dipper in England, it's the plow, and in ancient Rome, it was the chariot. But for some reason, since ancient days, we've all agreed that there's a big bear up in that part of the sky. So that one group of stars serves more than one purpose, and that's how it is with the Hercules story too. You're going to say, well, how can you say Virgo is part of the Hercules story when that's clearly Virgo, who is Demeter or Demeter, or perhaps Persephone herself, or maybe winged just. It just depends. So I'm just saying that Hercules was so well regarded in the ancient world. I mean, we think, oh, a couple of movies, a couple of TV shows here and there, a couple of cartoons. But then on top of it, just you can see how revered this hero was in ancient Greece and the Mediterranean, because his stories, even though the constellation itself is not particularly prominent, all the other constellations that tie in with it are. So this is from Bayer's Uranometria from the 17th century. And you can see that Hercules is depicted holding a club in one hand and wearing a cloak of lion skin in the other. He's got a lion hood there. And then in his other hand, he's got some branches, and you can see these golden apples. These are the golden apples of the Hesperides, which was one of the labors. And then, but if you look at other depictions, you'll see here in Uranographia in the close of the 17th century, now it's not that at all. It's hydras. It's hydra heads that he's holding. And then you go to another one, and this is from the book that came out in 1825 in London. You see that not only are those heads hydra-like, but actually they're dog heads. And you see the word Cerberus. That's the three-headed dog Cerberus. And then where the branches are, you see those golden apples of the Hesperides again. So it's gone through a lot of, like I said, the word is palimpsest, one layering of culture or story over another. And it's all in these constellation depictions. See, there they are. So let's talk about the fact that we're going to take that star chart I showed you earlier. And if you have a chart like that or get one later, you can follow along and do this. in the activity. We're just going to shade in all the areas in the sky of the constellations that pertain to Hercules. So first we shade in Hercules himself. Now, let's talk about his family. His great grandparents were very familiar to you all. That's Perseus and Andromeda, who, by the way, of all the Greek stories of heroes and damsels, this one pretty much has a happy ending. I mean, the worst thing that happens after the rescue of Andromeda is Perseus accidentally kills his own grandfather and throwing the disc at an Olympics game. That's the worst thing that happens. Unlike Agamemnon or Odysseus or any character you want to think of, any hero, that didn't happen to them. They settled down. They had a happy life. They had 9 children, 7 boys, 2 girls, and a lot of them went on to make more heroes in future stories. So those were his grandparents, his great-grandparents, I should say. Of course, his great-great-grandparents would have been Cepheus and Cassiopeia, but for right now, let's just shade in the areas in the sky that pertain to Perseus and Andromeda, because they're his great-grandparents. Now, Hercules, we call him Hercules, we know that he, in his labors, he had a lot of set tos with the goddess Hera, who was wife to Jove, Jupiter Zeus, and that was kind of interesting. So we call him Hercules, but in ancient Greece, he would have been known as Heracles, which translates to the glory of Hera. Now, some folks have said, well, that's because Zeus and Alcmene, his mortal mother, were trying to butter her up so that she didn't take any vengeance on him for being an illicit child of her husband. And so they said, well, Hera, this is the glory of Hera. He's your kid, all right. But that really, what most historians say is it's called the glory of Hera because Hercules achieves glory through the labors that were set upon him by the actions of Hera. His name before they came up with the glory of Hera was just simply Alcides. And as I say, the son of Alcmene and Zeus. And they did one of those sort of an echo of Moses. Alcmene took him out kind of in the wild, and she was attending to Hera, so the story goes, and they found this baby out there, and Alcmene knew it was her son, but Hera took the child in and literally took him to her bosom and tried to raise him as her own. And of course, the upshot of that was the Milky Way, because that kid, I mean, he was a strong nipper even as a kid, and he just when it's time to nurse, he nursed a little too hard, and she said, "Get this baby off of me," and she pulled him off. The stream of milk spilled down out of the sky, creating the Milky Way. But you all know that story. You do know that after that, Hera kind of soured on him, decided to do him in, so she sent a couple of serpents to take care of him when he was in his crib. And it was one of those things, if you've ever had a child and the child has been sleeping in another room and you're talking to people and suddenly you notice that the child isn't making any noises anymore, you all get that alarm look, which is what happened in this case. They said, we haven't heard from the baby in a while, what's going on? They rushed into the room, and there's Hercules playing with these 2 dead snakes. He played with them a little too rough, apparently. So that was her first attempt to do in the hero at a tender age. She didn't succeed. She did manage to drive him mad later on when he was married. He married let's see, he married, let's get this right, Megara? Yes, Megara, he married Megara, and in the story, Hera drove him mad so that in his sleep he thought that he was being attacked by enemy soldiers, and it turned out it was just Megara and her children, and that was the crime of Hercules, a terrible crime. In Greek society at the time, I've read that was the unforgivable sin, but that the first person in Greek mythology to offer a redemption, a chance to do penance, was a cousin of Hercules. That was Theseus, who had his own adventures as the fellow who slew the Minotaur and with Ariadne's help escaped the labyrinth. And that's Theseus. So they were cousins, and Hercules was going to kill himself, and Theseus grabbed him by the hand, which was considered a big taboo. And he said, look, there's a way to redemption. You have to go to the oracle at Delphi. And some people say Delphi, this is America, say anything you like. And see if the oracle at Delphi can tell you what to do to make amends. And he got there, and the oracle wouldn't have anything to do with him. So Hercules grabbed the 3-legged stool and said, well, I'll just do my own. And of course, Apollo, who was in charge of this kind of in charge of the oracle said, no, you can't be doing that. She'll do it for you. So the thing processed. It went okay. Nobody got hurt, even that small woodland creature who was looking in terror at Hercules when he's driving the chair. All right, so what the oracle said was you have to perform these labors, and we'll have your cousin, another cousin, Eurystheus, king of tyrants, we'll have him go ahead and he will administer the labors to make sure that you come through all right. And so they did. One thing I should tell you about Eurystheus is kind of an interesting pose. You only see his top half. It's not that he's wearing pajamas on the bottom half. He happens to be hanging out in a jar, a big jar that you might store olive oil in or something like that. And he's that way because unlike Hercules, he was sort of the opposite. They were cousins, but he'd been born premature. He was always kind of on the weak side and frail. And where Hercules was strong, he was very weak and was not given to activity or action or brave, daring do deeds. Where Hercules was courageous, he was a coward, and where Hercules had a big heart, as big as all outdoors, Eurystheus at heart was worse than the Grinch. So not the best. Well, if you want to have somebody set tasks for you that are pretty much impossible, he's the one to go with. So he sets these tasks. And the first one is these labors. Started off as 10 labors, but now it's 12 labors, and we'll find out as we go along. So here are the labors, the Cretan Bowl, the Cyprian hind, the girdle of Hippolyta, the golden apples of the sun, the three-legged dog of Cerberus, the cleaning of the Aegean stables, and the Nemean lion, the Lernaean Hydra. There was the boar, horses, Geryon, and so that's going on. The way I can remember all these things is I came up with a couple of mnemonics, if you have to try to remember this. So this is the mnemonic sentence. The lion hides behind the pig barn while the birds chase the bull and the horses, but my lady heard that the apples are for the dog. So there you got the labors in their correct order by most accounts. And then I came up with a better mnemonic, which is a little bit more poetic, I think. So the lion hides behind the boar. Boat ride. I had to put the boat ride in there because that's in the middle of the labors is this other adventure. In the stable, the birds sit on the backs of the bull and the horse. The lady feeds the cows apples while the dog barks 3 times. So there you go. That's the mnemonic. So write that down or wait for the recording. And so that's the Nemean lion, the Lernaean Hydra, the golden hind, the Armanthian boar. Boat ride is Jason and the Argonauts and Augean stables, Stymphalian birds, Cretan Bowl, Diomedes horses, Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, the lady feeds the golden cattle of the sun, the golden apples are there, and then Cerberus bark. So first labor, the labor number 1 is the Nemean lion. This one is easy. This is very easy because it's Leo the lion. So he fights the lion for a month. He finally vanquishes it. The bows and arrows did no good. The lion's hide was tough. He couldn't subdue it with any kind of other weapon, so he had to wrestle it for a month and finally dragged its carcass up into the sky and skinned it and kept the cloak, kept the skin as a cloak, which he wears from that point on. So there's Leo the lion, first constellation that we just talked about that's in the Zodiac that celebrates the first labor of Hercules. Next labor is the Lernaean Hydra. This is a multi-headed swamp monster. And this is obviously the constellation of Hydra, the Hydra. And that's below Leo. And as you know, the longest and actually the biggest constellation in terms of area in the sky. There are no really bright stars in Hydra except for the star Alphard, which is at the heart of the Hydra. So the way that he did this, you can see a couple of people in action there. Hercules would cut off a head with a sword. And when the head would try to regrow, his nephew Aeolus would take a burning tree branch and cauterize the wound so the head couldn't grow back. And then finally, after lopping off several heads, they took the last head, the 9th one, and they cut that off, cauterized the wound, and buried the immortal head under a rock. So it's still out there somewhere waiting for somebody to bring it back, I guess. Oh, so that's the Lernaean Hydra. And as it goes through all these other things, all these other constellations. You also have to shade in the constellation of Cancer, the crab, because while Hercules was there, pretty much up to his knees in Hydra heads, another critter came along and started pecking him on the heel, and that was the crab Cancer. And the crab, of course, failed. Hercules, I know, as they would like to say, barely an inconvenience. He just knows something was pinching at his heel. He stepped up and crunched down, and poor Cancer was crab meat. That was it. So what Hera did was she rewarded the crab by placing him up in the sky to show that he was brave to take on the hero. But because he failed, she made the crab very faint. So there's Cancer the crab. Next, zodiacal constellation. You see the head of Hydra immediately below the crab there. All right, so that didn't count. That labor didn't count because this is from obviously Kevin Sorbo and the other fellow who played his friend Aeolus, who was really his nephew. He helped. So the nephew helped. So Eurystheus said, no, you had to do these labors single-handed. You can't have people helping you out there. So I'm not going to count that one. So we'll think of another labor for you later on. That's where the golden apple is. All right. Third labor, the Cyrenian hind. This is a female deer with antlers. Go figure. And not only that, but the antlers are made of gold and hence golden hind. And the hooves are brass. And I understand it could also shoot fire like a dragon. So not only that, but it didn't matter because the thing was so fast, nobody was going to catch it. Now that was a trick because Hercules figured he could probably figure out a way to shoot the hind if he got close enough, but he was going to kill it. And that was a problem because this is the beloved of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, and his stepsister was not going to let him hurt this beautiful golden hind. So he had to be very political here and not cause trouble. He might have succeeded in the mission, but then failed ultimately because then Artemis would have it in for him from that point on. So he had a little talk to with Artemis and said, look, it's not my idea. I did not plan this. This has been given to me to do. I have to do this. It's the only way. She said she understood. He said, what if I can bring down the hind without harming it, without breaking any bones or anything? She said, okay, you're on. So he was very good at bowman, and he shot an arrow that pinned the two front legs of the hind together without piercing any bone or breaking any sinews or tendons or anything like that. And then he brought the hind back to display. And Eurystheus said, oh man, that's really something. That hind is great. I like the dead lion you dragged in here. Please don't do that again. The hind, I tell you, you let the hind loose in the garden and we'll be fine with that. I'll keep the hind. But that wasn't the promise that Hercules had made to Artemis. So he released the hind, but on the other side of the wall. So the hind just followed away. So yeah, it's there if you want to try to chase after it. So there is no constellation of a deer up there, but there is Cassiopeia. This is one of those double duty things. We know she was Hercules' great-great-grandmother, and of course, the principal in her own story of the Andromeda myth. But in this case, the W shape of the constellation represents the antlers of the hind. And that's how that got connected with Hercules. Next labor is the Erymanthian boar. This is a tough pig. This is a very tough pig. It's causing all kinds of trouble. Most of these animals were causing trouble in one way or another. And so the king was actually doing a good service by having Hercules clean up the pestilence in the area. And this boar was just really tough. And he never could defeat the thing exactly, battle it down until he could catch it. It was very fast. He finally ran it up a mountain into the snowbanks and got stuck in the snowbank. And then he dragged this boar back to the palace to show the king of Tyrians that he'd done the job. Now, as you may have guessed, there are no pigs in space. There are no pig constellations, but that's how it is. But of course, after having caught this elusive pig, he had to have a party. And so he met with his mentor, Chiron, and other centaurs, and they had a big centaur party because the centaurs really knew how to have a party. But like most parties, it kind of got out of hand. And the problem there was people were getting killed, some of them by Hercules himself. And so that they had to, but so there's two centaurs in the sky that commemorate this party that took place after the capturing of the boar. The Hercules is picking up all kinds of weapons as he goes. He's got the durable hide of the lion to protect him. He's also got a big old wooden club that he got that was the burnt out club they used to sever, to cauterize the wounds of Hydra. And now he's also dipped some of his arrows into the blood of the Hydra. to make them poisonous, burning, toxic. And unfortunately, his mentor Chiron gets shot. He gets shot with one of these, right? And so he can't die, but he's in mortal pain. So they had to find a way to euthanize him so he wouldn't suffer anymore. So that was Chiron, the teacher. That's Sagittarius, and of course, there's another constellation, Centaurus, which is almost of the same age. So those are our centaurs. Now, what he did when he got back was there is Hercules holding this big wild pig over his head. And there's Eurystheus with his hands upraised. And you can see he's in that jar. So whenever Hercules started to bring these critters in, like the boar was the thing. He said, I'm going to hide in this jar until you get that fearsome monster out of my palace. And I'm tired of hiding in the jar because it just doesn't look appropriate. It's not kingly, you know what I'm saying? So from this point on, anything you bring back to the palace, you meet me out by the gates. I'll watch and see what you do. I'll come down, I'll come to the parapet, I'll look down from the walls, and I'll say, I'll give you a nod of approval if I think you've done fine. Otherwise, don't bring any more wildlife into the palace. It just isn't proper. So there you go. Now, take a break from this because in another myth, Jason is fighting to get the Golden Fleece. And he manages to catch up with Hercules in between labors. And he says, hey, I'm putting together this great party. We got this guy named Argo. He built a ship that we're naming after him. We're going to call it the sailing ship Argo Novice. And we're going to sail over to look for the Golden Fleece. The fleece, as you may recall, was a magical flying ram, a male sheep, that rescued the kids, Phrixus and Helle, and took them to the island nation of Colchis. And in the story, Helle, of course, falls off, and where she lands in the water, the Dardanelles becomes what was then known as the Hellespont. But Phrixus, he is happy that the ram saved him, so of course he kills the ram, sacrifices it, and places its hide up in this grove. And the thing that was special about the ram was that its fleece was gold, the Golden Fleece. This is the Golden Fleece. So Jason was sent on his own mission to try to get that fleece back, and all these other kids, Peleus sent him on that thing, and Aeetes and Medea works their way into the story, and of course all the other Argonauts. So this involves a lot of constellations, a super constellation that was known as Argo Novice, which comprises now Vela, Carina, Pyxis, Sextans, more recent addition, as with Pyxis, also Puppis, Volans, and Dorado, also, and Columba, also more recent additions to the constellation field. And then, of course, Gemini, who represented, they actually went on the journey with Jason to get the fleet. Now, Hercules starts off with them, but a problem happens when they're restocking on an island to get water. Hercules had brought with him a young friend who was, Hercules was a mentor to, named Hylas. And Hylas made the mistake of dipping water where the water nymphs were, and they coaxed him into taking a swim, and that was the last anybody ever saw Hylas on this side of the water. So Hercules was despondent that he couldn't find his friend, and so he told Jason he'd have to beg off on the adventure and try to find his friend, which of course he never did. So dispirited, he went back to the quest, to the labor. And of course, the next one, so here we go. Gemini, the Hercules buddies, the fleeces there is Aries, the ram, as you might have guessed, and of course, Argo Novice is all those constellations I mentioned. Okay, the next one is the Augean stables. There was a king named Augeas. If there's one thing you're going to find out about these stories, first of all, the kings, it's like that line from the old Kevin Sorbo, Hercules saying, when the gods were petty and jealous, well, so were the kings and queens back then. And so this is a bad king. You know, Eurystheus is a bad king. Turns out Augeas was a very bad king. Can you imagine having 30,000 cows and putting them in a big stable and not bothering to clean up any of the cow deposits for like 30 years? Okay, that's just a bad king. That's like, you're going to get ocean on your hands, and that's just not going to happen. It's bad. So the labor was, you have to clean the stables and you have to do it in just one day. So Hercules said, yeah, I think I can do that. I can do that. And so he does that. What he does is he doesn't try to clean the stables by hand. He diverts the course of two rivers. And in some stories, Aquarius represents Hercules deflecting one of these rivers from a mountain pass that takes it straight through the stables. The other river is Readiness that starts just to the west of Orion. And the two of them flow in to make the part of the sky called the celestial sea. And so he does this, and of course, he does it in just a day. So that's great. And he does the labor. Now, so here's Hercules cleaning out the stables. Here's Hercules, as represented by Aquarius and the water flow. And then here's Readiness right here. And some people say Capricornus was the stables, others say it was Pegasus. I don't care. Like I say, these things serve double duty. We're going to use Capricornus again, so it doesn't matter. The stable cleanup did not count because what happened? Well, Hercules said to the king prior to the labor, he said, you know, those are some pretty mighty fine cattle you have here. I'm a Florida man, and I appreciate good cattle. And I'm thinking of going out to Texas, and they like cattle out there too, but I'd like some of those for my own. So give me like 300 cattle, and we'll call it done. And the king agrees to that, and later he backs out of the agreement. And then there's a big fight, a lot of people get killed, you know, it gets messy. But Eurystheus wouldn't count the labor because Hercules had demanded payment, and I think he actually did end up with the 300 cows after all. So he wouldn't count that labor either. So then comes the Hound of Cerberus. Yeah, that was the last of the labor. Stymphalian birds. These were, this is the other thing you're going to get from. There were bad kings, and apparently a lot of critters had it in for people. They wanted to hurt them, they wanted to kill them, they wanted to eat them. These were your typical man-eating birds. They lived on Lake Stymphalia. They were just decimating the population. So Hercules was sent to clear them out. Now, these birds were not stupid birds. These were angry birds, but they are also smart birds. So when Hercules came along with his bow and arrow, they said, we'll just hang out here in the trees. He'll never get us. So he had to employ a lot of noisemakers. He went to Hephaestus and got all kinds of noisy things. I don't know if he was pounding on an anvil like in Il Trovatore, but he did make a lot of noise. And that scared the birds. And then he shot at them and either dispersed them or killed them outright. So that's got the Stymphalian birds. And you're going to shade in the regions that contain Cygnus and Lyra and Aquila, and of course, Sagittarius too. The picture, oh, this is the eagle. This is Aquila, the eagle, pecking away at the innards of Prometheus, who backfired to Earth. That was his punishment by Zeus. And in the process of freeing the birds, carrying away the birds, he also rescued Prometheus, unbound him from the chains and ended his torment. You're probably saying to me at this point, well, okay, Cygnus, that's a swan. Okay, I've seen swans. They're like geese. They can be vicious. Aquila the eagle for sure. But Lyra, that's a harp. A harp is not a bird, but if you go back far enough, you'll see, good, I do have the picture after all. So there's Cygnus in the upper left, Aquila in the lower left with Antinous or Ganymede, which is a whole other story. And there on the right, you'll see the harp, but then you see this eagle superimposed on it. Because in the old days, the harp was also known as Vultur cadens, V-U-L-T-U-R cadens, C-A-D-E-N. Vultur cadens, the sweeping or diving eagle or vulture. And so it was also regarded as one of the Stymphalian birds. So that's how that ties in. And if you look, you'll find that in the middle of the summer triangle is in the lower right, that very small constellation of the arrow that was fired by Hercules. And if you look at the trajectory, obviously didn't come from Sagittarius, who was aiming his arrow westward, not eastward. This comes from Hercules, which is to the west of the bird. Labor 7 is the Cretan Bowl. This is a great bull that was going around and causing all kinds of trouble. And again, man-eating, as of course you might expect. Hercules had to rescue that, and just like the hind, it was going to be a catch and release program. He wasn't going to kill the bull. He later takes it over to Crete and releases it there, where it becomes a favorite of King Minos, and later sires the Minotaur, which is a whole other story. So shade in the constellation of Taurus, the bull, because that is the Cretan Bowl. There it is. Then we got the wild mares of Diomedes. Some people say Diomedes. Again, this being America, say it however you like. This was another bad king, and he had these mares who are very gentle. I mean, my daughter works with horses out on the farm west of town, and they are the most gentle creatures. Horses can be very gentle, and mares in particular. These were not. These were man-eating horses. So there you go. And Hercules had to stop them from their bad habit. So what he did was he took the king and tossed him under the horses. They gobbled them up, and that made them tame. So that's how it worked back then. Magic, no question, but that's how he solved the problem. So shade in the constellation of Pegasus. If you feel like you can put in shade in Aquarius, the cult as well, the constellation's been up there for a long time, and that might be the wild mare. Both of those, of course, you know, in the story, Pegasus is a stallion, not a mare, but let's not get into these kind of gender fluidity issues today. All right, so there's the median horse, right? Pegasus. And of course, Pegasus is very famous for the Perseus and Andromeda, and Bell. Hippolyta's belt. Now, this is Hippolyta, is about how America would say it. If you're English or if you're French, it'd be Hippolyta. No, that's why my wife won't let me speak French. I mangle it every time. Anyway, Hippolyta, I don't care. It's the queen of the Amazon. And this looks like a pretty fierce battle. You can tell Hercules in these vases because he's got that stereotypical lion hood over him, and he's got that. The club is very thin in this case, and you can see he's fighting with these Amazons. There was a battle that took place. In some versions, Hippolyta is killed in the battle, and others it just ends in a sort of a bloody draw. But the thing is, when Hercules got to the island of the Amazons, he went to sleep. He had a little fire there going, and Hippolyta came along, and she was going to kill him while he slept. But then, of course, Aphrodite stepped in and made her fall in love with him. So she had, Ginger went out with her pretty fast, and they decided to reconcile and be friends. And she actually gave him the belt. And Hera didn't like that, so she said, "Hey, Amazon, that bad guy Hercules is making off with the queen. Get him." And that's how the fight got started. So that worked its way out, not as nicely and smoothly as it could be, but he did end up getting the girdle of Virgo, of Hippolyta, which is represented by Virgo. Hippolyta is Virgo, Hippolyta. Okay. And then we got Gerion's cattle. This is a long journey. He had to take a really long journey to get there. He had to travel over land, he had to travel over sea. Basically, he went from the Eastern Mediterranean all the way to the Western Mediterranean, all the way out to what are called now the Pillars of Hercules. And you know the more famous one of those pillars is, of course, the Rock of Gibraltar. So they say he placed those stones there, one in Morocco and the other in Spain, just to say, hey, I was here, look, I put these big stones in place. So to get there, he had to get these golden cattle that belong to the sun. And on the way, he got really hot because he was walking toward hot lands, toward the west, toward Spain. And it was really, really, really hot. And he got tired of it. So he took an arrow and started firing arrows at the sun. And of course, Helios, the old sun god, came down and said, "What the heck are you doing, Hercules?" He said, "I'm hot." He said, "Well, look, I'll tone it down a bit. I'll tell you what, make your journey easier. I'll give you a boat. You can take the rest of the journey by boat. And there are the cattle, but you got to look out because they're pretty well guarded, I can tell you." And so he gets on the boat, which is sometimes represented by, so we're going to these are the constellations: Orion, Auriga, Canis Minor, and Scorpius. You can throw Libra in there because Libra used to be part of Scorpius. And why not also throw in Capricorns, because that's the boat how did we get to caucus already? So, okay, so caucus is a dragon monster type god. And these things are like, for example, look at Gerion on the left here. He's got like 3 heads and extra limbs and a couple extra, maybe 3 torsos. He's a happening kind of a guy there, and he's owning the cattle for Helios, and he's got a cow herd, and the cow herd has a little 2-headed dog named Orthros, and so all these things they're all working to make sure he can't get the cattle, but he does, of course, because who is he? He's Hercules. I'm Hercules. Batman, I'm Hercules. He gets the cattle. He ends up slaying Gerion and Orthros and also Eurythia. I don't think of his name in that. The cow herd. And of course, that's not bad enough. This sort of dragon fire breathing monstrous guy named Caucus comes along, and he steals some of the cows, and he drags them backwards so he can't see which way the cows have gone, and he drags them into a cave. Hercules is getting ready to leave. He notices some cows missing. There's one cow calling out from a cave. He goes, and that's the end of Caucus. That's the end of him. But he's often represented as Scorpius. And again, throw in Libra the scales because those were the old claws of the thing. So we've got Eurytion is the cowherd. That's Auriga. Geryon is again Orion, famous for his own stories. Although I would point something out. If you look at Orion, you notice he's got a club and a shield made out of lion skin. That's a typical rendition. Let me ask you, can you think of a story, any story, where Orion used a club or a shield of lion skin in a battle or any kind of victory? And the answer is no, there are none that you can call. This kind of reminds you of Hercules, doesn't it, with the club and the lion skin? This is because we think, and this is not we, this is me reading with other people who know more than I know, think that both Orion and Hercules are descended from a more ancient story, that of Gilgamesh from ancient Babylonia. That Gilgamesh, originally Orion was Gilgamesh, that's why he's got the club and the shield, because Gilgamesh did have a club, and he did fight a lion, and he did battle a bull. So you can see little echoes from the three-headed guy. Orthro is the two-headed dog, which is a cousin or brother to Cerberus and all those. So that's how those all tie in. Finally, we're getting to the last. Am I out of time?
Sorry to interrupt. We have about 4 minutes left.
Okay.
Just want to give you a little warning.
Golden apples of the Hesperides. These are nymphs which guard the apples. Actually, they don't guard the apples. By the way, just to say, the golden apples are actually oranges. We went to Morocco or to Spain to get these apples. And so I've got these growing in my backyard. This is awesome. That's what the golden apples of the sun are. And of course, Hippolyta, not Hippolyta, the Hesperides are these nymphs. They love Hercules to say, come get the apples. We'll take care of the dragon. Actually, have our dad Boates, he'll take care of it for you. So Boates goes, gets the apples, and he pets the dragon on the head, which is Laban, and that of course is Hydra or Draco. Atlas is represented by Boates. Now, how did he get free? Hercules had to agree to hold the world on his shoulders where Atlas did this task for him. And so Atlas does this, and then he doesn't want to give back the world, but Hercules tricks him into giving back the world to him so he can get the apples for that. The golden apples are the 3 stars in the handle of the Big Dipper: Alcade, Mizar, and Eliel. Okay, so those are the apples. And then finally, the last labor is Cerberus, the 3-headed dog. He has to go down and get the dog from Persephone and Hades. He actually basically domesticates the dog, tames it, and brings it back up. He rescues Theseus, who had gone down there to try to steal Persephone, and repays the debt. He'd been placed on the chair of forgetfulness, so he repaid the debt that he owed Theseus. And of course, he forgot to leave the critters outside, so he brought the 3-headed dog into the palace, and he goes right back into the pot again, and that's the end of the labor. So there's by the river of Readiness, and so there are all the labors and so on. And you can do this basically any way you want. So let me end my share and see if you've got any time for quick comments or questions.
Yep,
it's a lot. And
we have a few minutes.
Yeah, if you've got a full dome video system, this works great as a live presentation. So you're doing these things, you can program it or have somebody at the council say, go ahead and tell the story. And as you tell the story, the illustrations appear on the dome with the full dome thing. It's hard to lend itself really well to doing a good presentation and a live discussion. Give out oranges at the end, right? That's a great present. Any questions? Gilgamesh, yes. Oh yeah, the Star Trek Next Generation reference. I remember that. That's what Mike was saying, is that this one Star Trek Next Gen where Picard has to talk to these people, and they only talk in proverbs and myths. So you have to kind of be steeped in the myths to say, like, you know, that was a Herculean effort, meaning you put a lot of work into it. Or that was the sword of Damocles hangs over you because you're sitting there trying to enjoy a meal. And the king has hung this sword by a thread over your head. So how can you enjoy it? So myths are great ways to make that connection. And they did serve that purpose, not just to be entertaining and tell a story, but to pass on values of society and to represent different virtues and weaknesses of the human condition. Temba, his arms wide open. Yes, who can forget Temba and his arms wide open? My favorite. It's sort of a welcoming guy. Very, very, what is it? Quis custodes ipsos auspitiat, right? You know, great courtesies owed to the guest. Prius custodiet, ipsos, hospita. There, I said it. Ut hospita. Oh, who doesn't like a good, who doesn't like a good Latin lesson, right? I could use a few. Cosmos last.
All right, thanks, John. Yep.
Yeah,
Let's get down a
my pleasure.
hand. I'm gonna clap very softly so I don't hurt people. Awesome. We had some fun stuff going on in the chat there. If you haven't had a chance to scroll through, it was really interesting to. I guess I had never put much thought into how much myths have changed over time, and how things have evolved to become other things. So cool.
But the thing is, it covered just about all the ancient world's constellations. So there were temples to Hercules in every town. I mean, in Athens, of course, it was Theseus. He was the thinking man's hero. But Hercules, he didn't usually think things through. He was clever in a couple of things, and like getting the Atlas to take back the world. So he did have smart, but he found that I can't help being the strongest and the biggest, and so that's how we